So thank you very much for the kind introduction, and also for Arnūras Dulkis and his team for inviting me here and organizing this really interesting conference. I would like to talk about the EU budget, but I would like to put it also in a broader perspective, asking the question, why do we have an EU budget? I mean, the EU is not a federation like the US or Germany or Brazil. It's basically a special conglomeration of a number of countries which already have rather developed budget system, rather developed welfare systems. So the very first question we have to ask is why do we have an EU budget, and what do we want to make use of this EU budget? I prepared some slides, and if I get those slides, then I would be able to show them. Okay, so I also have to mention that a lot of the research I will present is a joint work with my colleague Güntram Wolf at Bruegel. So the outline is that I will first speak a little bit about the EU budget and put it in the perspective of federal budgets of other countries. Then I will look at the structure of the current EU budget and then give some remarks on the proposal for the next MFF. And I also prepared 3 questions, and I hope you will be able to help me to answer those 3 questions, but I will let you know when these questions should come. So first, let's start with some background and comparing EU with other federations. So I've just already argued the EU is a very special entity because basically it's a combination of developed nations, and its fiscal structure is completely different, or its fiscal history is completely different to what happened in the United States. I mean, the US 100 years ago and 120 years ago, the budget was very, very low. I mean, the share of GDP was about 2% both at the federal level and another 2% at the state and local level. And the US budget grown to a much larger value gradually as the state took on more and more roles. But in the EU, as I said, we already, so Lithuania when joined the EU in 2004, and many other countries, we already have a very large national budget, which basically does everything. So the key question is what additionality the EU budget can bring compared to national budgets, or another word which is very frequently used in Brussels, what is the value added of the EU budget? Question how we complement. A final issue is fiscal stabilization, which is a very interesting issue, because in federations, fiscal stabilization is typically done at the federal level. While in the Eurozone, again, we have currently 19 countries which decided to share a common currency without any special fiscal architecture or fiscal instrument. So again, a major question is whether that should be incorporated in the EU budget, and if so, how. Now, a few charts, how the US spending looks like. So this chart compares the US budget structure between the federal, which is the dark red, and the local and the state, which is in light blue. And you can see that, I mean, all of national defense at the federal level, quite obviously. Almost all income security is also at the federal level. Most of health is also at the federal level. But if you look at, for example, education or public order and safety, this is mostly at the local and state level. So again, I think we can certainly learn from these experiences. But for example, knowing that defense is done at the federal level in the US wouldn't really help much in the EU context, because in the EU context we have treaties which very clearly specify what competencies the European Union has, and defense is not such a competence, so it is and will remain in national hands. So we certainly can't, imagine anything similar to the US or other federation anytime in the near future, but maybe in the distant future too. The next chart shows the EU budget, its composition, and it's very unfortunate that some of the letters don't look well. So what is in the dark red? It should appear that common agricultural policy, accounting for 38% of the current EU budget. This light red on the bottom should appear as cohesion policy and structure and cohesion policy and regional policy, which accounts in the current EU budget 34%, and you can see all the others. And now I would ask one question, if I can have the first question on the screens, please. So we know that still the largest current spending item in the EU budget is the common agriculture policy. And my question to you can be seen there. So if you look at all subsidies to the agricultural sector as a share of GDP, so not as a share of the EU budget, which is here, certainly it's very, very big, but as a share of GDP, then whether EU spending on agriculture as a total, including both the small national contributions and the EU, how does it compare with agricultural subsidies in other EU countries? So the first answer, as I recall, it's higher than in OECD. The second should say that it's about the average, and the third should say that it's smaller than the OECD average. And so far, the answers are coming. Thank you for responding. But still, it's very clear that the bulk of people, 3/4 of respondents, think that total EU spending, again, both EU and national, as a share of GDP, is higher in the EU than in the OECD. Now let me show you a chart, which is this one, and basically this gives the answer. So this chart comes from the OECD data. So it shows total net support, so both net support and taxes paid back to the agriculture producers in OECD countries, economies, as a share of GDP. And you can see the EU is basically in the middle. Certainly we spend more than, let's say, US and Canada, and far more than New Zealand and Australia, where they almost completely get rid of agricultural subsidies. But we, for example, as a share of GDP, we spend less than Norway, Japan, Switzerland, and Korea, and some other countries. So from this chart, what I conclude is that not the total amount of agricultural spending is the problem, but the way we spend it. And then I will show you a couple of results from some other people, including the European Court of Auditors. So first of all, CAP, the Common Agriculture Policy, is mostly incorporates income support to farmers. The EU treaty says, lists the goals of agriculture policy, and one of the goals is that to support a fair standard of living for the agricultural community, or something like it is there. So apparently it is, or not just apparently, legally, this is an EU objective. But there are a number of buts. So first is it's very, very uneven. A recent Commission report noted that 80% of the transfers go to only 20% of farmers. Certainly these are the biggest farmers, but still it's very, very unevenly distributed. And what is also an even bigger problem in my view is that richer countries get more. So let me go to the next slide, and then I will come back. Again, unfortunately, my PowerPoint font doesn't appear on your computer, but at least you can see the dots. So dots are the European Union countries, and I know by heart a few dots. So some of the top guys here. So first of all, you can see here the average wage in agriculture in 2016, and I measure that in purchasing power standards, because let's say €1 worth much more in Romania than €1 in Luxembourg. So in order to compare the standard of living for agricultural people, we have to use purchasing power standards. And on the vertical line, you can see the pre-allocated CAP funding per agriculture employment. I use employment because, as I said, one of the treaty goals is to provide a fair standard of living for the agricultural community. And some countries which get a lot are Ireland, Denmark, Lithuania is somewhere here, but clearly what you see here in the dots is that those countries which are richer, they get much more, and I think this is not good. Now, but let me come back for another issue. A more conceptual issue is that is that if it's indeed an income support, then I think it should be a social policy. And if it's a social policy, then we shouldn't call it agriculture policy. I mean, why do we support agriculture producers? Agriculture is an important sector, but for example, education is also important. Why don't we support such a massive scale, education in countries? Or healthcare is super important. Why don't we support hospitals and doctors and nurses throughout the European Union? It's also absolutely important. So we spend a lot of EU money on one particular sector, which is undoubtedly important. So what we eat, the food quality, food security is also certainly a very, very crucial issue. But other crucial issues, health, education, and many other things are also very, very important. So spending so much money on one particular sector, which is more a social policy, I think it's very, very dubious. But I also have a couple of things. I'm just mention a few. The European Court of Auditors concluded that the CAP has not really achieved its goal in terms of greening and biodiversity. And I can list many other critical observations on whether CAP works really well. So I think CAP should change. Now, let me have my second question, which is about cohesion policy. So we talk about cohesion policy. Now, it's a bit difficult question because I ask about the academic, what is the typical conclusion in academic literature? But let me ask and see your view. So whether the typical finding of the academic literature about the impact of cohesion policy on growth. So option number 1, cohesion policy boosts long-term economic growth. Option number 2, cohesion policy has a short-term impact on economic growth, but not in the long term. And the third option, which at least has not yet received any vote, cohesion policy, now there are some, thank you. Cohesion policy does not really impact economic growth even in the short term. Now, as I said, I ask about academic literature, and academic literature is very, very mixed. I mean, there are millions of papers concluding sometimes really the opposite to each other, depending on what methodology you use, what time period they use, and also can depend on the number of other factors. But as I see, the leading answer is that cohesion policy has a short-term impact on growth, but not on the long term. It's about 2/3, about 1/3 say that it's also good for the long term, and some people are concluding that doesn't really matter in the short term. Now, again, my answer will be on the next slide. So let me go there. And so, as I said, it very much depends on the methodology. So if one uses so-called a macroeconomic model, when where there is labor, productivity, capital, and you say that EU funding boosts productivity, boosts capital, boosts labor participation and everything, then by definition you have to find that cohesion policy has a long-term impact on growth. But this is a bit artificial in my view, because it just reflects the assumption that we assume that all of this spending improves productivity and capital and labor, then we will, of course, just get the result back what we assume. So I think the other more empirical papers show much more mixed results. One, for example, Benedetta Marzinotto was one of my colleagues at Bruegel earlier. Piankowski and Berkowitz, they are 2 European Commission employees, and both of these surveys concluded that the results are very, very mixed. So some people find that empirical paper that yes, positive, other finds positive but only in the short term, but also other finds that even negative or no impact at all. So, and my own reading is very similar, that it might have some short-term impact, and so it should have a short-term impact, because if you spend more money in a country, by definition that should increase economic output, but the long-term results are questionable. But then we have to ask, why is it that? And I argue that in contrast to agriculture policy, which I think doesn't really have a European rationale, cohesion policy has a European rationale, because, for example, Bulgaria cannot support itself. I mean, for catching up. I mean, Germany can support Bulgaria, so rich countries can support the poor. So I think it has a rationale, but needs a much better targeting, design, control, and also corruption is a big issue. Now, So time is running. So let me come to the future of the EU budget, and I would say there are three major priorities which I hope to see, and to some extent I see them already in the proposal. But really the first one is to assess which spending areas constitute a real European public good and how to best provide them. As I argued, again, we are countries in the 28 countries or 27 when the UK will leave, very developed welfare states, very developed public finance systems. So the big question, what additional thing can the EU budget bring? And I think we have to look at all of this which have clear pan-European implications. For example, border protection is absolutely clear, how Greece and Italy protects their borders, have an impact on how many irregular migrants arrive in Denmark or in the Netherlands. Defense, again, as I said, it's a national competence, but some coordination and research, certainly there should be space for Europe. Security, migration, climate policy is quite naturally European. I mean, climate is a global event, so if some countries destroy their environment, that will have an impact on others. Some big pan-European projects on research, I think very, very important, or like very large projects like the EU satellite programs. So I think there are a couple of really pan-European public goods which indeed would deserve, and I think the focus should be on those. Now, we have the status quo, and I'm not a dreamer, so I know little will change. So then we also have a second priority, is that at least what we have, we should make it much more efficient. In particular, the common agriculture policy and the cohesion policy. For CAP, I would have loved to see at least national co-financing of that, but it has not been proposed. And certainly the third question, whether there is a need for euro fiscal stabilization, and if so, where it should be, in the EU budget or outside. Since I have only 3 minutes left, I'm afraid I will not have time for that, but at least a few of these I will discuss. Now on the Brexit, I think Ironbeck will discuss it later, but let me just mention the results of our calculations. So it basically shows what is the so-called Brexit hole, or the Brexit gap in the EU budget, if the UK doesn't pay anything. So if business as usual, the first column, if everything, all spending and revenues will increase the same way as gross national income increases, then there will be a 94 billion euro gap altogether in the 7-year period according to our calculations. The second column shows that if we freeze in real terms, so we only cohesion and CAP, so we only increase with inflation, then basically there will be no gap and even a small surplus. And if we freeze nominally, so exactly the same amount of euro will be spent in the next 7 years and in the current 7 years on the 27 only, so excluding the UK from the current period, then we would have even 100 billion euros extra for spending on other priorities, which is quite a sensible amount. Plus, the UK might contribute if it will exit orderly. But I will skip that discussion because time is running. So let me just have basically 2 short slides or quick slides on the proposal which is on the table. And Mr. Arnoldas Pranskyvikius, I'm sorry for pronouncing your name not perfectly. He already very nicely introduced the proposal, so I don't have to spend time on that. But let me say what I find good and what I find less good. So indeed, more focus on European public goods, which is good. I mean, border control, defense, research, innovation, digital, some increase in migration spending, I think is very much welcome. I also very much welcome this new rule of law procedure, because if there are doubts about rule of law, whether fraud or corruption will be properly examined and in the countries receiving money that can undermine the spending of EU funds. So I think that's very important. The budget revenue side, I also very much welcome some more emphasis on some environmental taxes. Again, this is European goal of have a better environment, so aligning the revenues related to the goals is also welcome. Also moving the more customs revenues to the EU, I think would be justified. Currently 20% of the customs duties are retained by countries for collection costs, and 80% is transferred to the EU budget. But certainly the collection cost is not 20%. I mean, I'm not an expert, but I think collection cost could be maybe 1% or 0.5%. So, and since the EU has a common external trade policy, I think all customs duties should go to member states. So I would have proposed to cut it from the national part from 20 to 1 and increase consequently the EU part from 80 to 99. But at least moving from 80 to 90 is a good step. And also that more or less CAP and cohesion has been freezed nominally, that I also welcome, but there are also some deficiencies. So there were a couple of improvements on the structure of the budget, but it still remained, I think, overly complex and not really transparent. Again, this itself would deserve a long discussion, and my time is over. So let me leave it like that. Again, I said I would love to see more, at least a co-financing for the income support. If you look at CAP has two pillars. One is more income support, the second one is more rural development. And unfortunately, rural development, in which I would see more European value, was cut more than income support. I think it was not a good decision. External action would be super important, but the increase is very limited. Basically, as a share of GNI, external action spending would remain the same. The Commission has the same numbers showing, it goes up by 20% or 30% from the current period to the next period, but they forgot to mention that GNI also increases by about 25%, so it means that external action spending will remain the same as a share of GDP. I would have loved to see a big increase. Europe has major responsibilities outside, and we also always talk about tackling the root causes of migration, then certainly we should spend more. And the tools on euro area I find very weak, but I don't have time for that. So let me just leave it like this, and thank you for your attention.